She walks into the date believing the universe owes her something. You can see it in the way she scans the room, like she's entering a stage, not a meeting between two human beings. She's already rehearsed the story she'll tell her friends later. The free meal, the attention, the validation she thinks she deserves for simply showing up. Entitled women always arrive with a script, but the moment she sits across from a real man, not a desperate one, not a simping one, not a man begging for her approval, her script begins to collapse. It's not dramatic at first. It starts small. A subtle shift in her posture when he doesn't lean forward immediately. A flicker of confusion when he doesn't shower her with compliments. A twitch of annoyance when he doesn't pick up the check before the waiter even places it on the table. And then it hits. He asks her to split the bill. That's the moment her entire worldview fractures like glass under pressure. Because for the first time in a very long time, she's facing something she has never trained for. A man who sees himself as the prize. A man who doesn't need her approval to validate his existence. A man who has options and knows it. When entitled women face real men, they don't face resistance. They face a mirror, and they cannot handle the reflection. Most people don't understand this collision because they're too busy watching dating videos online, too distracted by the circus of complaints, too numb to recognize the deeper psychology behind all of it. But I've watched this dynamic play out again and again with clients, friends, strangers, even random couples in restaurants. And every single time the pattern is the same. Entitlement melts under standards. There's a reason dating feels like a battlefield. Entitlement is the smoke in the air, the thing you can't see but feel burning your eyes. I scroll through social media and see woman after woman filming 2-minute rants about a man who didn't pay for parking, didn't choose the right restaurant, didn't arrive in a luxury car. They say things like, "I deserve a man who treats me like a queen." But there's something no one asks them: what makes you a queen? They never answer that part. They never can. Because in their world, existence is value, presence is contribution, attention is currency, and any man who disagrees becomes the enemy. But real men, men who built themselves, who clawed their way into discipline, wealth, purpose, don't worship anyone for existing. They don't buy love. They don't negotiate with delusion. They don't feed entitlement. And when an entitled woman encounters one of these men, she experiences something she has avoided her entire life: accountability. I had a client recently tell me about a date that could have been a scene from a psychological thriller. She arrived 30 minutes late. No apology, no explanation, no respect. She sat down, immediately grabbed the menu, pointed to the most expensive items and ordered them without even looking up. Conversation was minimal, one-word answers, scrolling on her phone between bites, classic extraction behavior. When the bill came, she placed her hands delicately in her lap, as if she'd been trained to never touch something as vulgar as responsibility. Then he said the words that detonated her universe. "Let's do separate checks." She froze. She blinked like she'd been slapped. And then she said, "A real man would never make a lady pay." He smiled and answered with the kind of clarity only a man with self-respect can deliver. "A real lady wouldn't assume." She left, furious, embarrassed, absolutely humiliated by the reality she'd never had to confront. Later that night, she posted about him online, calling him broke, calling him rude, calling him every name that helped her avoid the truth. But he walked away knowing what most real men know now. The moment a woman leads with entitlement, the story is already over. Entitled women think they're looking for high-value men. They're not. They're looking for men who pretend to be high-value while still feeding their delusion. But here's the secret. High-value men have standards. They have boundaries. They have a life that doesn't collapse without female approval. These men don't tolerate drama. They don't chase selfishness. They don't negotiate with someone who brings nothing but demands. They want peace, contribution, respect, emotional maturity, not a walking wish list disguised as a human being. And that's why the collision is so explosive, because entitlement is a currency that only works on insecure men. The moment she meets a man who can't be manipulated by beauty alone, the game ends, the script ends, the fantasy collapses. That's the hook most people don't realize. The downfall of entitlement doesn't happen slowly. It happens instantly, in one moment, in one sentence, in one man's refusal to bend. And that's the beginning of everything that comes next. She always thought the world would rearrange itself around her desires, that men would compete, perform, bend themselves into shapes that made her feel important. But when an entitled woman meets a real man, the world stops rearranging. The attention stops flowing, the pedestal collapses, and what's left is the truth she's avoided her entire life. That value isn't inherited, it's earned. That respect isn't demanded, it's exchanged. And that a real man doesn't orbit anyone. A real man stands still, grounded, unmoved, watching silently as her illusions fall apart around her. Because here's the brutal thesis most people will never say out loud. Entitlement thrives in the absence of standards, and the moment standards enter the room, entitlement starts choking. Real men don't raise their voice. They don't argue. They don't defend themselves against nonsense. They simply refuse to participate in the fantasy. And to someone who lives off validation the same way lungs live off air, that refusal feels like suffocation. You can see the shift happen. It's almost biological. Her body tenses, her face tightens, her voice becomes sharp, brittle. It's the sound of entitlement, realizing it has no power here. I've watched this happen across cultures, continents, languages, beliefs. Entitled women leave their ecosystem where men are conditioned to appease them, and they walk into societies where men treat women as equals, not royalty. And suddenly, the behavior that once worked like magic stops working entirely. It's fascinating, honestly. The psychological recoil is immediate. Take American women who fly to the Netherlands expecting a parade everywhere they go. They imagine men will fall at their feet, offer to pay for everything, shower them with compliments simply because they're foreign. Instead, Dutch men look them dead in the eye and say, "Here's your half," direct, simple, no nonsense. They communicate their intentions clearly, no games, no pedestal, no worship, and these women crumble, not because the men were rude, but because the men were neutral. Neutrality terrifies entitlement more than hostility ever could. Hostility at least acknowledges your importance. Neutrality means you're just another human, nothing more, nothing less. Then you see the videos afterward. He didn't even compliment my outfit. He expected me to pay for my own wine. He told me straight up he wasn't interested. Yes, because that's what adults do. And to someone raised on constant praise, on inflated self-worth, on digital applause, direct honesty feels like cruelty. Germany, Poland, Austria, Switzerland, it's all the same story. Entitled women arrive expecting princess treatment and leave confused that they received equality instead. Equality they claim to want, but can't emotionally handle when it no longer benefits them. And the funniest part, they call it oppression. Imagine that. Splitting a bill is oppression. Being honest about lack of attraction is oppression. Expecting contribution is oppression. No, it's adulthood. It's reciprocity. It's reality. One client of mine put it perfectly. He said, entitled women don't want equality. They want power disguised as fairness. And he's right. Entitlement doesn't seek balance. It seeks advantage. It seeks control. It seeks a one-way exchange where her presence is considered payment enough. But real men don't operate in fantasy economics. Real men believe in balance, in effort, in partnership. They're not impressed by beauty detached from character. They're not hypnotized by superficial charm. They've built too much, survived too much, accomplished too much to be manipulated by someone whose only currency is attitude. You can tell everything about a woman's intentions from her reaction to simple suggestions. Let's grab coffee. Instant outrage. She's not interested in you. She's interested in resources. Let's split this one. Immediate offense. She's not about equality. She's about extraction. Let's walk in the park instead. Sudden disinterest. She doesn't want connection. She wants benefits. These reactions expose people faster than any psychological test ever could. And here's the part entitled women never understand. Successful men aren't cheap. They're selective. They're testing for greed, not saving money. They're testing character, not calculating costs. They're screening for a partner, not providing charity. I know men who intentionally keep first dates inexpensive on purpose, not because they lack money, but because they refuse to waste it on someone who wouldn't even show up if she couldn't extract something. These men own companies, real estate, portfolios. They could buy a dinner that costs more than her monthly rent, but they won't, not until they know she's real, grounded, genuine. Entitlement interprets this as poverty, but men interpret her outrage as proof she's not worth a second date. And this misunderstanding, this gap between delusion and reality, widens every year. Social media pumps her ego full of hot air while life keeps trying to puncture it. And eventually, she meets a man who doesn't play the game, a man she can't manipulate, a man who doesn't need her. And that's when the story truly begins. When an entitled woman realizes her usual strategies don't work, something primal shifts inside her. You can almost feel the panic rise beneath the surface, subtle at first, then boiling, then erupting into a quiet desperation she tries to hide behind sarcasm, attitude, or forced laughter. But a real man sees it instantly. He recognizes the tremor in her voice, the defensive tilt of her chin, the way she suddenly starts overselling herself. Because entitlement is confident only when unchallenged. The moment she feels the ground beneath her wobble, that confidence evaporates, and what's left is something far more revealing: fear. Not fear of him, fear of not mattering to him. That's the wound entitlement has tried to cover for years, the terror of being ordinary. When a real man treats her like a human instead of a goddess, her entire self-image trembles. She's built her identity on reactions: the stares, the compliments, the attention, the men who chased her at the expense of their own dignity. And suddenly she's with someone unmoved by her beauty, unfazed by her attitude, uninterested in worship. That's when the psychological unraveling begins. You see it on dates and conversations, in small daily interactions. A woman who always expected men to bend starts bending herself. Not because she wants to, but because she's terrified of losing control of the dynamic. And real men, the men who've been through storms, who've built themselves piece by piece, they can sense this unraveling the way a warrior senses the shifting wind before a battle. I once knew a man who handled this perfectly. He met a woman who was used to commanding every room she entered. Loud voice, heavy entitlement, constant demands hidden behind the word preferences. She tried dominating the date with monologues about what she refuses to tolerate, what she expects from high-value men, listing standards that weren't standards at all, just veiled attempts at manipulation. He simply smiled, sipped his drink, and said nothing. Not because he was intimidated, but because he didn't negotiate with delusion. Halfway through the evening, she noticed his silence, his calm, his complete lack of effort to impress her. And she changed. Suddenly she was asking him questions, leaning forward, laughing too hard at jokes that weren't funny. She was trying, really trying, because for the first time in a long time she felt something she never expected to feel around a man: pressure. By the end of the night, she asked him if he'd like to go somewhere else. He stood up, gently placed some cash on the table, and said, "You're interesting, but not aligned with the kind of life I'm building." Then he walked away. No drama, no regret, no second thought. She followed him outside. "Wait, what do you mean?" he said. "You lead with demands. I lead with standards. Those two things don't mix." She blocked him later that night because entitlement always masks rejection with anger. But she spent months talking about him. A man she went on one date with. A man who didn't sleep with her. A man who didn't even compliment her. That's the impact real men have. Not because they're harsh, but because they're immovable. Entitlement is a strategy. Real manhood is a structure. Strategy breaks against structure every time. I've seen this dynamic play out across cultures too. Women who travel looking for men to validate their inflated sense of self, the passport queens as some call them, end up facing men who don't care about their nationality, their attitude, their Instagram reach. In places like Poland, Czechia, Hungary, Finland, Denmark, men treat women with fairness, not pedestalization. They communicate directly. They don't give attention unless they feel genuine connection. And these women crumble under neutrality like it's cruelty. One American woman I met in Warsaw told me, "Men here are so cold, they don't chase." I told her they don't chase because they don't need to, and because you haven't given them anything worth chasing. She hated that answer, but she knew it was true. And then there's the financial illusion. The belief that a man paying for everything automatically means he's generous, masculine, or successful. But real men use money differently. For them, money is clarity. Money is a filter. Money is a way to reveal character. Suggest a coffee date and watch how quickly entitlement surfaces. Suggest splitting a bill and watch how fast her mask falls. Suggest something simple and free and watch whether she values connection or consumption. A friend of mine does this intentionally. First date, coffee. Second date, walk in the park. Third date, something nicer, only if she's proven that her interest is genuine, and it's never about saving money. He could spend $1,000 on a date without blinking, but why should he? On someone who hasn't shown a single ounce of reciprocity. When he explained this to me, he said something brilliant. A woman's reaction to simplicity tells you whether she's dating for attention or connection. And he's right. Attention seekers hate simplicity because simplicity starves their ego. Real men know this. That's why they don't budge. That's why they walk away so easily. They're not afraid of being alone. They're not desperate for approval. They don't need a woman to complete them. They're already complete. And that's what makes entitled women panic. They can't comprehend a man who doesn't need what they're selling. Because once you remove beauty from the equation, what's left? For some women, nothing. For others, everything. The difference becomes clear the moment she sits across from a man who refuses to play along with her delusion, and the unraveling continues. Slowly, quietly, inevitably. There comes a moment, a quiet, shattering moment when an entitled woman finally realizes the truth she has spent her entire life avoiding. Real men are not interchangeable. They're not disposable. They're not waiting in line for their turn to impress her. A real man is rare. A real man is deliberate. A real man is sovereign. And when she stands in front of one, her old tricks die instantly. The charm, the teasing, the passive-aggressive tests, the calculated withholding, it all collapses when he doesn't respond the way weaker men did. She tries to pull away to see if he'll chase. He doesn't. She tries to provoke jealousy to see if he'll compete. He won't. She tries to punish him with silence. He enjoys the peace. And that's when the panic sets in. Because without leverage, entitlement has no identity. I've seen this collapse so many times it has become predictable. It starts with confusion, turns into irritation, shifts into insecurity, and then if she's honest enough to feel it, drops into shame. But most aren't honest. Shame is too heavy for a fragile ego, so they choose the easier path: blame. Blame the man, blame the culture, blame the country, blame the city, the app, the timing, the weather, Mercury retrograde, anything to avoid the truth staring back at them in the mirror. But a real man's rejection is different from any other. It doesn't just sting, it reveals, it exposes the hollowness beneath entitlement, the absence of depth, the lack of emotional maturity, the failure to develop anything beyond external appeal, and that revelation is a psychological earthquake. I once watched this play out at a networking event in real time. A woman approached a successful entrepreneur, a man who'd built himself from nothing, who had the calm presence of someone who has nothing to prove. She walked up with a smirk, opened with, "I only date men who," and before she even finished the sentence, he said, "I'm not interested." Silence, pure, devastating silence. She froze, not because he rejected her, but because he rejected her without hearing the pitch, without evaluating her worth, without acknowledging her imagined importance. It took her 10 entire seconds to process what happened. 10 seconds of pure internal buffering. Then she tried again. New line, new tone, new attempt at charm. He simply nodded politely and walked away. Her face twisted into something primal. Not sadness, humiliation. Later, she told people he must be gay. That's the default coping mechanism. If a man rejects her, he must be flawed. But the truth was simpler. He had standards, and she had none. This is the moment that defines everything that follows. Because when an entitled woman meets a real man, something inside her breaks. At first she hides it under bravado, then anger, then superiority. But behind closed doors, in the privacy of her own mind, the questions start bleeding through. Why didn't it work? Why wasn't I enough? What does he see that I can't? And the answer is painful. He saw the gap between who she is and who she believes she is. He saw the difference between value and entitlement. He saw that she was seeking a provider, not a partner, a lifestyle, not a life, validation, not connection. Real men don't respond to illusions, they respond to substance. That's why the biggest shock of all comes when these entitled women travel, when they leave places where men have been socially shamed into servitude and enter cultures where men simply expect reciprocity. Watching their fantasies collapse is almost anthropological. In Switzerland, men don't pedestalize. In Denmark, men don't chase. In Germany, men don't sugarcoat. In Spain, men prefer their own women. In Japan, men choose peace over chaos. In Brazil, men expect femininity and contribution. These women go overseas expecting worship and find something horrifying instead. They are average there, ordinary, unremarkable. Because in many cultures, beauty is common, femininity is normal, and reciprocity is expected. Their personality, something they never had to develop, becomes the determining factor. And for the first time in their lives, it works against them. But the most brutal part? Men talk. Not publicly, but privately. Group chats, circles of friends, business networks. Men warn each other about entitled women the same way women warn each other about dangerous men. She wanted me to pay her Uber. She demanded a $200 dinner. She refused to go out unless I picked her up. She said a man should fund her lifestyle. And just like that, her reputation becomes a weight she cannot escape. Entitlement ages, accountability does not. I've watched women waste their 20s rejecting good men for not being perfect, spend their 30s chasing men who want nothing to do with them, and enter their 40s furious at a world that stopped validating them. They write articles about how happy they are being alone, but their eyes tell the real story, because deep down they know the truth. Entitlement is a fast path to loneliness. A real man doesn't need you to calm his insecurities. A real man doesn't need you to complete his life. A real man doesn't need you to validate his worth. He wants peace. He wants reciprocity. He wants connection built on something real. And if you can't provide that, he will walk away without hesitation, without apology, without looking back. Because the strongest form of masculine power is simple, the ability to say no and mean it. And when entitlement meets that kind of strength, the outcome is always the same. Entitlement loses every single time.